Just to introduce where we're going next on this journey of ours, talking about the future of sustainability, we're going to be talking now future-proof leadership, cultivating organizational change. The session is really dedicated to exploring the dynamics of leadership in the face of rapid technological, environmental, and social challenges. And how do we cultivate the adaptability and resilience needed to not just survive, but to thrive as well. So this is going to be a very interesting one, I must say. Something that I also take a lot of interest in is that how do you change mindsets that have been there for so long, and they need to change in order to survive. So I really want to see how this works out. It's called Healthy Watersheds, a Vision for the Future. So let me call up my panelists. Samir Randera-Rios, he's from WWF Nedbank Green Trust and Corporate Relations Manager. Dr. Shafiq Adams, Executive Manager of Water Research Commission. And Zoe Norton is a branch lead for Gauteng's Water Institute, Southern Africa. Here they all are. Come on up, guys. All right, have a seat. You can see all the microphones here. I'll scooch into the corner here. All right, so we are, of course, talking all about these different leadership abilities and everything like that, but I think the main focus for this particular panel is the imperative of navigating sustainable water practices and the evolving landscapes that shape the future of water management. So that's where we kind of are hoping to go with this one. So let me begin with you, Dr. Adams. Obviously, being an executive manager at Water Research Commission, South Africa's climate is classified as semi-arid, and that's what we are. But what does that mean for the way that we use water in South Africa?
Yes, can you? Yeah. So I think it's not just semi-arid; it's also arid. And then I think the minister said if you go out to the west, it's sometimes less than 100 millimeters, so that would be classified as arid. So what this means is that we naturally have a water deficit. So, and what we then need to do is, and of course we have a country that's built on, for example, mining, so people settle necessarily where there's no water. Yeah. Like Johannesburg is the only city that sits on top of a watershed. So you need then to bring water to those people, and what we then do is we need then to transfer them. We need to move water across the country. So of course our distribution is uneven, and this unevenness creates inequity. And you then need a system that needs to respond to that in terms of providing water security for humans, but also looking after the environment. So naturally, we are, without having the bad practices that we're having already in trouble. It's as short as I can explain that.
And that's my worry, because it was lovely speaking, I mean, listening to what the minister had to say, because he did delve a lot. It's amazing. I'll tell you now. The moment you mention the word minister, you see what happens. One, two. I'll make sure I don't say the name anymore. Okay, we should be up. All right, let me check. Voice should be coming any minute now. 1, 2. There we go, we're back. It's so funny. Every time you mention the government, the electricity goes off. But don't say I said that. It's terrible. I hope the same doesn't happen with the water, because that is a concern. It really is. So I was really listening quite intently to what the minister was saying and all the plans that are in place and what they plan on doing, and is it enough? And I asked that because you guys are the experts in all of this. So were you listening to the minister? Are you happy with the plans that government have in place and what they're doing, and is it enough?
Apologies, I had to step out briefly to do an interview with the...
No, please don't worry, if you haven't.
But, no, I did listen to some of it.
Okay.
I do think that, I think that the plans are exciting. I think that government has been for a long time, but I think we all know that there was a gap in maybe I can call it action. But I think now government is placing a lot more focus. It feels like things are like the tide is very slowly turning and changing. I think that there is renewed focus on areas that need to be focused on, obviously with things like master plan and that kind of thing. But I think the biggest problem that government has is that it's really when it comes down to implementation.
Yeah.
So, it's great to talk about big plans and it's great to advocate for these things, but when it actually comes to the implementation of them, I think that's sometimes where we fall down. And I think that's, the proof will be in the pudding, really, because seeing how we deal with the next 5 years, I think that's going to be critical, particularly we're all aware of delays, as Shafik has referred to, bringing water from Lesotho, and the delays in the Lesotho Highlands Water Project Phase 2 will have a significant impact on Gauteng. And I think for me, the next 5 years are just critical, and how the department deals with that, how government deals with that, and how they manage that, and particularly what message they're giving to the public, I think is critical.
Yeah.
I think personally that we are not making, without wanting to create panic or anything like that, I think it's really important to communicate and be transparent with the public that the next few years are going to be tough.
Yeah.
And we've heard terminology like water throttling coming from the city of Joburg. What does that mean for Joburg? What does that actually mean for our water infrastructure? What does that actually look like? I think that for me will be really interesting. And so as much as I appreciate the plans that the minister has set out, I think when it actually comes to implementation, that might be where we'll really see if that comes.
And it is a concern because, as you say, I mean, these next 5 years are vital. And, the infrastructure is probably the biggest thing that's letting us down. But it's not only in the water, it's in many other areas, but water is life. And without that, we're in big trouble. So, Samir, Dr. Adams, I am going to come back to you because I do want your views as well on what you heard the minister saying. But Samir, let me talk to you because I many years ago, Samir, I embarked on a journey with WWF where they went to the source of the water. And it was such a wonderful thing where it was this whole campaign talking about water doesn't come from a tap. And it shows you where water came from. So it was a very wonderful thing for me to be on, but that was just a few days. This is what you've dedicated your life to, which is fantastic and really a really good thing. But when we talk about the imperative of looking after water, of sustainable water practices, how important is this? Can you emphasize this enough?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that particularly for this audience, we're talking to a corporate audience here, and you may ask, why should we care about water? And it comes down to one word, which is risk.
Yeah.
And I've worked with many multinational corporates that are looking at, where their risk lies throughout the world. And South Africa always comes up as one of the top most risky countries in the world from a water perspective. And I'm sure I don't need to do much to convince you, but it's coming at us from all angles. We know that we're a water-scarce country, that most of our water resources have been already allocated, and that there's delays in getting new water resources on board. We know that we've got aging infrastructure that's often failing. We know that there's wastewater treatment works where, a shocking number of them, a shocking percentage of them are literally failing and spilling raw sewage into our rivers. We know that there are millions of people in this country that don't have water access. And on top of that, there's the impacts of climate change, increasing risk of extreme events like floods and droughts, and we're really experiencing the impacts of that. So from a corporate perspective and from a societal perspective, we face massive risk. And if we don't act to counteract that risk, corporates face the risk of halts in operations. They face reputational risks. They face the risks of protests. They face the risks of stopping activity or their supply chains being interrupted. There's so many potential risks, and it can seem a little bit overwhelming, but we have to do something, and we have to do it together.
I mean, we do. We really do. I mean, I know one of the places we went to and on this walk was to a disused mine. It was finished. It was over. There was nothing left in there. But it was left in such a poor state and the communities that are around there. I mean, the water facilities, the dams, all of that was just abused. And then once it was over, they pick up their tools and they leave. Now, how is that possible? I mean, this is business we're talking about. So there's two spheres here, whether you're the consumer, like you and I, whether it's business, whether it's government, we all have a responsibility. But are businesses doing enough, though? Because that's, you know, what I saw just from a mining point of view, that for me was disgraceful.
I think it's very difficult to talk about business with one brush. There's a
Indeed,
whole range.
there are many, but in general, do you feel that enough is being done from business side?
Well, I would say that South Africa is quite an interesting case because I think that more than any other country, South African businesses take their sort of corporate responsibility more seriously than almost everywhere else in the world because it almost gives us a license to operate in many cases. So you're seeing that many of the sort of top-end businesses are doing things voluntarily to be sort of the gold standard from a water perspective, from an environmental perspective. They are trying, they are setting limitations, and they are pushing government and society to actually perform well. But then you get the other side of the coin, which are the delinquents, so to speak. And, you know, there's many of those. Many of them are abusing the environment, abusing water. And interestingly, I saw a graph recently that showed that over a 30-year period, the good performing industries or companies that embraced good environmental ethics outperformed the delinquents by 54%. Now, that's not necessarily there's not necessarily a causal relationship between those, but it does show that I think that the best performing industries are recognizing that this is something that we need to care about. This is something that society cares about and that investors are going to care about, and something that could potentially affect business in the long run, and it's something that they need to take very seriously today.
Yeah, all right. Dr. Adams, let me come back to you now. Water quality, of course, this is one of the biggest problems, and the minister did speak a lot about Rooiwal. We saw horrific repercussions of not looking after the quality of our water, people picking up diseases, dying, and these can all be avoided. But let's talk about that as an issue, and where we're at with water quality, the infrastructure that is supposedly cleaning our water that we consume. As a country, how are we doing there?
Yeah, I think, and again, it plots on a spectrum similar to the previous one. So you have your delinquents, and you have the well-performing. But overall, the problem with pollution is it's released somewhere and it's been expressed somewhere else. And I think that's often not what we're looking at. For example, a lot of the times we talk about the wastewater treatment plants. So we know the bulk of them are dysfunctional. But also we have a huge non-point. So for example, the application of fertilizers and that brings nutrients to this. But that's much more difficult to pinpoint. But combined, they create this problem that we are seeing, again, being expressed in the Vaal. We see it being expressed in Hartbeespoort Dam, because it's not around there. It comes right from the top of the catchment. And it starts, and I think this morning also said, it starts at the individual. What's my behavior? Yeah. Because we're quick to say it's that municipality, but I was horrified the other day. There was on Facebook, they were discussing what do you do with the oil when you service your car at home. And the range of things that people are saying. But I bet these are the same people that scream at the TV at night that government is not doing their job. So, and again, the water quality, and it is an issue. It's we see it, for example, and globally we have something what we call the planetary boundaries. So we see biogeochemical flows. It crossed the boundary way before climate change and those type. But what's in our mind? We talk about climate change a lot. There's a new one that's emerging, novel entities. So novel entities is like your stuff that you get out of your minds, your heavy metals, etc. But the biggest concern that we're seeing, and it sits on every table here, is the issue of plastics, where it's macro and micro plastics. So coming back to what corporate is doing, what we're doing in this room is also not right. Mm-hmm. But you see, when microplastics hits the problem, We're going to point at the TV who's not doing that, but we're not doing that introspection and say, okay, but what do we put out there? So I think it's, again, the spectrum, but it is indeed an issue. We see artists on the TV all the time. We see the water lettuce and hyacinth on the TV. And that only develops because we have too much nutrients in the system.
Yeah.
And where does it come from? It's not just, but it's easy to say, okay, and you have to take a picture and say, okay, the wastewater is overflowing. We know that. But it's also the other pluses that we need to unpack. And I think maybe the media also need to say, okay, but hang on, you guys keep on saying municipalities, but all the farming across these water courses are in this catchment. What's the impact? And we're trying to establish that as well. So I think we need to have a whole society debate around this thing.
Yeah.
Because if we say it's a government, it's like you project all the time. But we never take all our combined efforts is going to solve it. Because if we solve the wastewater treatment plants tomorrow, we still have the other pluses.
Absolutely.
So how do we deal with it? So I think we need to have a much more balanced view. And again, it's useful to the planetary. And I mean, the thing of microplastics, they're now picking it up in placentas of pregnant women.
Sure.
You see these forever chemicals, etc. And that was not a wastewater treatment plant.
Yeah.
That was in manufacturing by corporate and industrialists.
Yeah.
But we're not having that discussion. We're having, and of course, it's election year. Everything must be government, or it's government's fault. And so, but yes.
It's the truth. It is the truth. Because and Zoe, I want you, because I can see you feel very passionate about this, so I want you to add on to it. But it is the truth. And that's why I did bring up the corporate angle on this, because we have to take responsibility for, it's not just government, and it's easy to blame them. It is easy. But talk to us. I know you've got a lot to say there.
No, I just really resonate with what Shafiq is saying, and I think the public responsibility and the private responsibility in terms of sectors, that goes hand in hand, absolutely. But I love what he said about just personal, and I hope that this isn't too controversial, but just looking out at the crowd, there must be about 200 plastic bottles that you all have on your tables. For an event on sustainability, perhaps we could have rather used glasses and bottles of water. It constantly bothers me when I go to events like this, and it's just, people talk about sustainability. Do you do this? It's such a cliche, but be the change you want to see in the world. Don't talk about sustainability if you don't implement that kind of thing in your own personal life. If we want South Africans to take on board these issues that we're seeing in the water sector, let's respect them enough to ask them to be part of the team that is part of the change. And I think that that's so important, and I really appreciate that Dr. Adams, that Shafiq raised that, because I think that's somewhere where we shouldn't discount the importance of public impact and collective public impact. Yeah. But similarly, I think there's responsibility on the side of the private sector. And something that I wanted to talk about was also just, the thinking around what would be called a circular economy model. But basically that someone's waste could be somebody else's resource. Yeah. So when we talk about wastewater, perhaps for another industry, that wastewater could be utilized for something else, or they already have the processes in place to treat that water. There's a lot of cross-cutting solutions across various industries and across various sectors that could be explored, and I think that that's really something that government, public sector and private sector need to work together on, is to try and create those linkages. And I think similarly, what would be really good to see is to see our legislation taking that on board, or to see government bringing that into legislative kind of compliance, because I think that's a big issue, is that, I appreciated what Samir said about the companies that are doing well, but what are the ramifications for the companies that are not doing well? We call them the delinquents, but really what's the ramification? And And personally, I feel in the private sector, it comes down to the bottom line. So if you are not financially penalized for something, you're never going to comply with it.
Yeah.
So that's where you would really want to see that being joined together so that companies, it will immediately catch their attention because they care about the bottom line.
Absolutely, yeah. Hit where it hurts most, and it's always in the wallet. Samir, let's talk about perhaps some trends that we're seeing that shape the future of water management.
I think the interesting thing about water is that it lies at the confluence of so many different interrelated trends. And I think big ones currently are the sort of dual crises of climate change and biodiversity loss. And really, water is where the rubber hits the road on both of those crises. So I think a big emergence recently has been the Global Biodiversity Framework that came out in 2022, which kind of sets the agenda on a biodiversity front. And that, I think, a lot of corporates are now getting behind and starting to integrate into their strategies. But if you look at it from a water perspective and where, how this shapes the way that we as society and corporates engage, I think that now we're looking towards nature as a solution to many of our water problems. So recognizing firstly that intact ecosystems provide us with a whole range of services. It captures, it stores, it cleans, it regulates our water supply. It can buffer us against extreme events, etc. And in South Africa, what's convenient is we've got these amazing areas called the strategic water source areas, which are where that receive more water than the rest of the country and where we get the most bang for our buck in terms of investing in ecosystems that can help to improve the water security of the country. And we've got partners in the room that have recognized this and have sort of invested in these strategic water source areas and in the ecological infrastructure in those areas. And what that means is that we can have these multiple benefits. We can improve the natural ecosystems and their functionings. We can create jobs and we can create opportunities in those areas. And in doing so, we can improve the water security of the entire country and make sure that we are buffered against some of the impacts of climate change.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big trend. And the second trend that I'd like to point out is that I think that across the country and across the water sector, there's a deep recognition that we can't do it alone.
Yeah.
That water is everyone's business, that everyone needs to collaborate and cooperate in order to solve these issues. And there's opportunities for partnerships at every scale, whether it's at a corporate scale, whether it's at a local community scale, and everything in between. And I think that partnership paradigm is coming from government, it's coming from corporates, it's coming from NGOs, it's coming from everyone. And there's a recognition that we actually need to work together on this. And I encourage all the corporates in this room to look for those opportunities. Look for those opportunities to work with your neighbors, to work with the people in the catchment, to work with NGOs and work with government. And we as WWF have a range of opportunities, if you're looking for them, of different partnerships that you can join in order to start to address some of these issues and work beyond your fence line.
Love it. Thanks, Samir. Dr. Adams, let me come to you. There must be a lot of innovative strategies as well. We've heard a few from Samir, but things that you've seen, things that we can implement and that are being implemented.
Yeah, so I think, and maybe just to take a step back, people always talk about climate change as it's going to happen, so we can plan for it.
Oh.
We've been in it for 50 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a lot of people do not realize, and again, the technologies and the WRC was established in 1971, especially for this after the late 60 drought. So, and water transfer schemes across catchments is a South African innovation. So we take water from a water-rich catchment and we bring it to certain areas again. But in terms of the innovation, so we always push that boundary. So for example, we look at it in an equation form, at least. So how do we diversify our supply sources? So from a country that was a dam, we used to call ourselves a dam building nation, so we relied on surface water. How do we diversify that? I'll come back to that. Then we look at the demand management. How do we use better what we have? Then we look at how do we anticipate these shocks? Can we model how our climate will change? And yes, it has. And all our models so far, it's fairly correct. And then, of course, the biggest one is around not just technological innovation, but also policy innovation, so around the governance innovations, etc. And I think the minister spoke around this. We've recognized that some of our plans and strategies and even the acts is not sufficient because it was developed after 94 when you had to distribute and get water out. So the Services Act had to run in front. And then so in terms of diversifying water, how do we get many more supply mix? So how do you de-risk from one source? So innovations in groundwater up to the point that South Africa was leading for a long time cloud seeding, or making it rain artificially. But we ran into some issues there in terms of people complaining we plan to play court and things like that. And then in terms of the efficiency, because that's the other one that we don't talk about. We talk a lot about how do we build the next Lesotho, but we're not talking about how do we use less water as an individual and then into a household, etc. Innovation that we've been driven, and we've partnered with, for example, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and we have, you've seen Amalulu outside. So the new sanitation, the gold standard is not to flush and it needs to go 500 kilometers somewhere else. I'm exaggerating, of course, because you need water to do that. But you can, all your water can be in the toilet. You can beneficiate the thing. You can separate your wet and your dry, and you can use that water. You talk about the circular economy. You can make biochar. But more than that, we have now toilets that flush on 2 liters, a full flush that your 13-liter cistern gives you. But the acceptance and the uptake, it just boggles our mind. So there's also, because water is a natural monopoly, so, and it's run by, apologies to engineers, and they always resist this type of thing. And if you're a monopoly, you don't want to really change too much. So there's a lot of those type. In terms of our models, we can now accurately, we're now predicting by the end of the century, 90% of Southern Africa will be drier.
Sure.
With a lot of volatility. So, and you're experiencing it already. We swing between droughts and floods and heat waves, whereas we were taught we had these return periods when I did geography at school, or whatever it was called. But now Durban gets its 3 months rainfall within 24 hours. The infrastructure was never designed for that. So you need to model it, and then you need to come up with innovations and know how to build back smarter.
Yeah.
What they're doing, it's like replacing, because they're replacing like it's not going to happen again. But the models are saying it's going to come again, it's going to wash again, then you need to build. So you need to build. So a lot of the innovation is how do we build smart cities, or what we call water-sensitive design, which looks at grey infrastructure, which look at blue infrastructure, and it looks at what Samir was talking about, the green infrastructure. So the issue of the innovations around nature-based solutions, etc., coming into play. So I'll stop there.
Yeah, listen, I'm still waiting for that smart city. I remember the president told us about that a while ago. He promised us we were going to smart city, but yeah, I don't know. That's the thing, is exactly what you said earlier, Zoe. It was just a matter of there's a lot of talk, but not too much doing. So let's wrap this up. We've got to end, and Zoe, I'm leaving it with you. In terms of the risks that we face, because that, at the end of the day, is perhaps maybe the only way we'll understand how dire the situation is. What are the risks that we face if we do not implement these water management tools that are so desperately needed?
Sure. I think that question is a difficult one in the sense that I think the risks kind of occur over time. So I think I'll use the prime example. We all saw what happened in Cape Town with the Day Zero. I'm sure it's been spoken about, I'm sure it's been mentioned by the minister and multiple people, is just the infrastructure. If we go into a time of really low supply where we cannot meet the demand, and I'm speaking more in Gauteng than across the country, but it applies across the country as well. The aging infrastructure just won't cope. And we've all seen what happened with Eskom, and that we just cannot cope with replacing and maintenance with load shedding on and off, on and off, on and off. If we enter a time of doing water throttling, where we actually have to cut back I'm sure many of you, if you're based in Blagari and any of those areas that have just not had water for about 10 days or whatever that was, it firstly was absolutely awful, and also there just aren't a lot of alternatives. And I think that's what I think isn't being driven home for people. You know, a lot of people have installed solar. There are we've made alternative energy solutions for our electricity problems. But when it comes to water, there aren't a lot of alternatives from a domestic perspective for people not getting water. You know, sure, the department can send water tankers around, but as far as I understand, there's not a lot of alternatives. And I think for me, what's not being spoken about enough is that it's going to look like a day zero Cape Town in Gauteng if we don't start implementing a lot of these and looking at a lot of these innovative solutions that Dr. Adams has mentioned. Yeah. And sorry, just to add, like, I think the one of the main things that I think is also from a company perspective that I think really is doing us a huge disservice is the time it takes to get water authorizations is a huge challenge in this country. And I think that it's creating a big problem for private companies, for the private sector. And that's how you land up with what you termed delinquents who just don't bother because it takes too long. Yeah. And then, as Dr. Adams already said, our legislation needs to be updated because it was developed at a time that was just not... It was applicable at the time, but now we just need it to be updated because it needs to allow for more flexibility and for more adaptability in terms of new innovations. And then the last thing that I wanted to say is just, you know, Dr. Adams, you spoke about a lot of innovative solutions, but I think something that is, applicable particularly in the public sector, but across South Africa that is problematic is that we have a lot of data systems. We have so much data. I'm sure that in both of your positions, we come into contact with this all the time, but we have systems that don't speak to each other, and we have a lot of limitations around people being very protective about their data. And without data sharing and without evidence-driven decision-making, it's our biggest limitation in terms of making the right choices for the innovations we install, for the technology we install, for the upgrades that we do, for development. Having a greater data repository and government managing that well, or whoever is managing that well, for me, that's the linchpin in bringing about change.
Guys, thank you so much, because really this is an important conversation, is the vision for the future, a vision for now, in fact, because as you say, I mean, it's real. We're seeing it happening real time in front of us, and something urgent needs to be done by everybody who's a part of it. So please, will you give my panelists a round of applause as I let them go? Dr. Shavik Adams, Samir Randira-Rees, and of course, Zoe Norton. Thank you very, very much, guys, for being with us. All right, so this moves us on to our next discussion now, and this is the future of monitoring and reporting. So it's achieving profitability with transparent sustainability. And this is how we're going to discover how to effectively measure and report your firm's sustainability against frameworks while maintaining profitability. So I'm not going to go into it too much because our moderator for this panel is Prajna Khanna. She's the Global Head of Sustainability and Vice President of the Process Group and Naspers Limited. So let's give her a warm welcome. Good to see you. Thank you. Good to enjoy you too. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you, and I'd like to welcome Loshni Naidu, who is Head of Sustainability at the JSE, and Shamila, my colleague as well from the NBI, who's CEO of NBI. Thank you so much. I don't see that. And Karina, sorry. I didn't see, I just saw you. Sorry, here we are. Thank you very much. Thanks for being here and joining the panel. It's fascinating. Just before this, during the break, I had a few people come up to me and talk to me about, you're taking on a very big topic and there's a lot of resistance to it, the big monster, non-financial reporting or ESG reporting, and how are you able to ensure profitability, the tension between profitability and sustainability reporting? And so I think I'm going to start off with a bit of an observation here, and then I'd love to have our esteemed panelists here to share their experience and their thoughts on it. So financial accounting on a company's performance, is that in question? Is there anybody in the room who'd like to raise the hand? Or let's say, put it the other way. Who thinks any company, listed, non-listed, SME, small, should report on its financial performance? Raise your hands, please. I would assume most of us, right? I only saw 4 people, so maybe we should stop financial reporting as well. But now, and that might be a bit problematic, Loshni. No. So there's not even a question about financial reporting. If you look at the financial statements of a company, right, in the annual report or however they would put it out, if it's an SME, if it's a smaller business, in every company there is profit, losses, capex, opex, you have all those line items. In every financial data point, there is an implicit non-financial performance. Let's talk about costs for a minute. So costs will include multiple things. You know, your procurement, which links to your supplier engagement, supply chain, how you invest in your people. So let's just go dive a little bit deeper into this one. So the costs that are related or relevant to human capital. In a year when the business is not doing so well, you know, the orders are not coming in, there's not, we're not able to demonstrate profitability, most businessmen know and businesswomen know that cost down equals profits up. So it's very easy to cut back on some of the nice-to-haves, like investing in your people, in the training and development, or really good benefits, or team building in your people, which is the biggest asset for a business, for a company. It may look good because your costs have gone down. So for an immature analyst or an investor, it may actually look, yeah, in this annual statement, they've managed to really do well on their costs. But how does that impact in the longer term if you have non-engaged employees, if you have employees who are not, if you have attrition, if your employees leave, and if you're not able to attract the best talent that you can in the sector? So what is important, and this is for me, I have experienced this, and this is what I believe is our driver at Naspers for reporting on our non-financial performance, is that it is simply the extension of reporting on your financial performance. And I'd love to address this question to each of you subsequently. Is on the first one is, why do you think is there this perception of non-financial reporting being this big monster in the room? So let's start with you, Loshni.
So I'm going to lean on some of my experience before joining the JSE. So I've worked with accountants in various forms, and I think there's 2 questions we need to ask. Who holds the purse strings and makes those decisions? How many of you in the room can read a financial statement? Okay, there's quite a few. Damn it, I should have changed that question.
More than those who believe we should report on financial.
So my challenge with working and in this space is that trying to convince people why non-financial, which I really don't like the word, but we're going to use it for this conversation, has to be quantified. And it almost felt like there was a mental block to quantifying. Because I think we took for granted that all of the things that we use, and I'm leaning back to the panel that we had before, where as consumers, we make the decision to consume the water, to buy the shoes, to buy the food that we have. We make those decisions, which drives how companies make their products and services decisions, right? So that drives profitability. And we take for granted that we will always have access to water, access to metals and minerals to make these things that we consume. So it's almost like there's this mental block, cognitive dissonance that happens within business, within ourselves, because I'm not going to just say it's companies that make the decision, it's us as well. We seem to check ourselves at that door when we walk into the office, that what we do in the business is separate from how we live our lives. But coming back to the working with accountants, so my experience has always been, I know finance, I know accounting, I know how numbers work. I don't know this stuff. It's very fluffy. It doesn't make sense. So trying to quantify it has always been difficult. And some of the conversations we've had over the years is, should we be quantifying? because some of these questions are about ethics and morals. So taking the mining industry, for example, do we quantify lost time injury frequency rate? Do we quantify death? Do we put a number to someone's life? So I think it's a complicated answer. We're not going to have a very simple solution. But for me personally, I believe we should quantify, because I think if we actually put a rand value to something, we will take it more seriously. We will value it more if we put a number to it.
Thank you. And actually, to your point, on lost time injury rates, also OHS, I actually think it's rather simple, because if a company is not managing its in health and safety, is not providing an adequate level from policy, from infrastructure perspective, you will not be long-term commercially profitable. So to me, actually, it is an indicator of the long-term commercial viability of a business. But so I find it simple. So I agree to disagree over that. What do you think from and not just, for Shamila, this is more also not just the listed entities which have a regulatory compliance requirement, but also why do you think all businesses should be talking about their non-financial performance?
Thank you, Pragya, and thank you to the organizers. It's great to be here and also to see so many familiar faces in the room. I think, I'm going to pardon my croaky voice, and building a little bit on what Loshni has said, I want to use let me start with two concepts. And the first one is going to be on entrenched short-termism. And the second one is going to be on, and within that, externalities, but also then timelines. So first, let's start with the first one. The time horizons that we generally work with when we're doing disclosure, when we're doing measurements of our companies, on what we're incentivized for in terms of management and things, are generally shorter term. And so Pragya, to your point, and I was going to scold you because you're not allowed to answer the question, but you ventured into that space, thank you. But the time horizon is an incredibly important factor in all of this. And so if we look at the markets and how we've grown up in that space, generally, look at your incentive schemes. They're not based on 10 years, 15 years, or 20 years. They're usually 3 to 5 if you're lucky. And so within that, what we're incentivized to do is to maximize the short term. And generally, those are linked directly to profits and to share price and things like that. So what is it incentivizing? It is our behavior to prop up those things in the shorter term. Within that also is the fact that we have grown up in a bit of silos in how we approach this. When you go to study to become a chartered accountant, you focus on those numbers. When you study to be an engineer, you're focusing on the processes. When you study to be in sustainability, then you're kind of considered maybe the fluffy guy who, hugs the trees. That might be dumbing it down a bit, but effectively, the fluffy guy that is hugging the trees is the one that is trying to ensure that you have an environment in which that business can thrive in the longer term. The difficulty that we find is the quantification, to Loshni's point. So some of the issues that we know will become material issues are generally longer term in the materialization. But even in that, I would pause for a minute, because already we're seeing some of those impacts. Climate change, yes, is the poster child by and large for sustainability, and we absolutely must not look at only that. But we're living in the country already now where we've seen, climate-related issues and weather phenomena that are outside of the normal patterns. So we're looking at the cost directly with those, right? It's frequency, it is duration that we're looking at, and that is creating disruptions across many industries. So we're starting to see some of that already materialize. But when were the warning bells rang? Decades ago. Did we take them seriously? No. Where did they come from and what were we incentivizing? And eventually you can immediately start to see some of the mismatch. So this is, I think, our inflection point where we realize that we really are running out of time. The previous panel was shocking. Yes. It's an eye-opener. But then again, those were not things that we've known about from now. So our human nature is the other one we need to bring into consideration, and is the fact that generally, unless we're faced with something head-on immediately, we don't really pay that much attention to it. And so that is part of what does that. And so, Loshni brought the point about we kind of check some of ourselves in at the door when we walk into work. And so why are those things not connected more? And then on the other one, on the time horizon, I'd mentioned already, but I think also we need to understand that reporting is not an end in itself. No. It is a means to an end. And it's the question we deeply need to ask ourselves is that what is that end that it is trying to drive? And so I'm going to say that it is the responsibility of everyone in the room, regardless of your current career pathing, be that accounting, be that whatever the case is, to understand the fundamentals of sustainability. When we talk about concepts like planetary boundaries, when we talk about the need to ensure adequate social foundations, it is in every one of our interests to ensure that this is done and to find the space in our existing careers to make that point and to understand what that means, because if we don't take that collective responsibility, there's nothing that we're going to be able to account for in the very near term. If we talk about tipping points and things, and I don't want to get into that too much, but it is critical that we start asking. And right now, I think just the way in which information is disseminated has made it a lot more easy and a lot more accessible for all of us to engage with these issues that fundamentally are what we're talking about in sustainability and start helping to make the linkages. And I think finally, Pragya, the whole term of non-financial is also linked to what we consider to be material. And generally, what is driving our reporting is what is within our lens of materiality. So when you have those discussions in your business and you decide what it is you're going to report on, it's largely going to be about what can I quantify and therefore what can I attach numbers to. The problem is the time horizon, is that most of these factors will become material, they just won't be material immediately. However, the thing that we don't quantify is that the action we take now can mitigate how that materializes in the longer term. And so the need to do that hard work is now, and actually start applying our minds, and even if we don't report on it, that we've had that discussion, even if it is behind closed doors. Because just our definition of financial and non-financial is inherently flawed because of what it leaves out.
Thanks, Shamila, absolutely. And to your point on materiality, I think, great recognition. A few panels ago, my colleague from Sassel was talking also about, on how broad a spectrum sustainability is and ESG is. Karina, from your experience as well, what do you believe, do you see a maturity developing and evolution also in your experience, your company? And what do you think should be the drivers to start work, at least quantifying and reporting on the material areas of your impact?
Well, I think, thanks to, of course, the King reports, I think we'll all recognize that governance is quite mature. Admittedly, the rest of the reporting is not as mature, and it is something that needs to receive focus. So, thanks to my colleagues, the JSE sustainability guideline disclosure requirements obviously aided a lot in providing context for South African companies, to look at, and equally so for unlisted companies. I think it's very useful for unlisted companies to use that as a reference guide as well. That being said, and linking it to what we spoke about earlier on in terms of materiality and some of the challenges of why companies potentially are not doing it yet, is definitely data. I think we'll all recognize that when it comes to non-financial metrics, we have a myriad of different systems, and if it's metrics perhaps that have not been material or significant in our business historically, we may not necessarily have that data, and that collection is critical, and it links to what's just been said in terms of starting it and starting to collect it and think, thinking about it. Which is absolutely critical. So that definitely is a focus area that corporates need to think about, as a starting point.
Nice. And I think, just building on that for my next question, is that you see that there is a bit of growing divide between the reporting maturity of businesses and whether they're listed or not, entities reporting on their non-financial performance. I'm simply using the word we can use. In fact, the EU has moved away from the NFRD, which was the Non-Financial Reporting Directive, to the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. It's still easier, I think, for some of the leaders in the corporate world to internalize it from a non-financial versus financial perspective. But there's a growing divide in ESG. When I say disclosures maturity, I don't mean performance, but specifically on disclosures between the businesses in the Global North and some of our businesses in the Global South. Do you believe that this actually puts us at a back foot when it comes to accessing capital and being a participant in the capital markets?
Definitely, because what we're seeing is we've got the bigger companies who are multi-jurisdictional, who are multi-listed, and are looking already at the standards and the frameworks that are coming out from the EU, as you mentioned, the IWSB S1, S2, apologies, acronyms, that's the International Sustainability Standards Board standards. And we just saw the US SEC putting out their rule. Okay, the Supreme Court's put that on hold. But so we're seeing a push, not just from reporting disclosure standards, but adding on to, for example, the EU's got the due diligence, they've put out greenwashing, the UK's put out a product labeling. So we're seeing a lot more legislative regulatory requirements within this space. Now, if you are a company that is exporting into these jurisdictions or have operations in many of these, you have to be taking these seriously or your business is not going to survive. And what happens then, these larger companies potentially have the teams to wrap their heads around and get their systems and processes in place to respond to. But what happens to the rest of the value chain that feeds into these larger companies who don't necessarily have the resources or the funding to be able to respond? So the challenge here is for how do you set up your data systems, get the resourcing, and we also see already in the country, we have such a dearth of sustainability skills. We are losing, again, to the global north. You know, there's positives and negatives to that. But in terms of competitiveness, it's a big challenge in trying to respond. In terms of having the resources and the funding, big challenge again. Access to funding, again, big challenge. But we are looking to and we're hoping that the larger companies, because part of these reporting standards requires from them to look at their value chain, so that they may be able to dig deep down and support that value chain and bring their suppliers along with them.
Roshni, just a quick follow-up on that. What do you think are the enablers that the JSC or the NBI or the reporting ecosystem can create for the smaller companies who are at the starting point of that journey?
So there's two things, and we had this conversation. I think it's capacity building, trying to be the support and raising the awareness, building that capacity so that we can fill in those resourcing gaps, because it creates opportunities for people coming through the ranks who want to change careers, who feel passionate, that we want to be able to scale those people. So that's one thing that I think, partners with NBI, with other corporates, we can do that. To replace those skills that we are losing. But it's also bringing that generation along who are more creative, more innovative, who think about things differently from the generation that's gone before them. So maybe we have better solutions to some of the problems that we've created. But I think it's about starting somewhere. But before that, I wanted to mention two things. Proportionality and materiality. That is something that comes through every single standard. Reporting framework, legislative requirement, where proportionality talks about that you can start somewhere. You don't have to, and I think in one of the previous panels, somebody mentioned, you don't have to try and do everything at once. You understand what you have the biggest influence or impact over, and that's where you start and you build on. And materiality, as Shamila mentioned, it's what's important to you, and just building from there.
Shamila?
Thanks, Pragya. In use of time, I'll just build on that quickly, because I think that your quick question for us is that, so what do we do about all this, right? And we need to accept, firstly, that as a country, not just South Africa, but I think as a region, as a continent as well, we need to own our own story. Because let's go back to the question that you asked, which is about the impact on capital flows. Capital flows to where it sees opportunity, right? And our markets are still an opportunity for investment compared to many others. However, the frameworks could start creating challenges in terms of the understanding behind what those inherent risks and opportunities are in this. And I'm going to use risk and opportunity, because I think what we're not necessarily doing is highlighting the opportunity we have, which is the flip side of this, and to say, where are our growth areas as a country? What are we doing, and how are we as companies informing the discussions that are creating that enabling environment for our industries to thrive? And to be, first and foremost, an attractive investment destination. And then, of course, creating, and making others understand a little bit more, clearly what it is that our challenges are. we're a transition. We know in an economy that needs to transition. But I'm not going to repeat all the challenges that we hear every day about how difficult that is. Still, over 80%, coal in the grid, all of that, and the inherent, embedded carbon that creates, for example, in our exported products. So what does that mean? It means we need to be able to first and foremost ensure we're part of those discussions where policy, decision-making, economic policy is being done, reindustrialization policy is being done to say, these are the pressures we're facing, but these are the actual massive opportunities. Let's start directing our policy, our R&D in that direction as a country. So we start changing the fundamentals. And then within that, when I say own our story, it's like when we're sitting in a discussion that is international panels or whatever, this is what South Africa needs to do. This is the transition we're undertaking. Here's all the positives of the things we've already tried to do. Our NDCs as a country are at the low range actually aligned with the Paris Agreement. In fact, there are a number of big emerging markets that actually can't say that,
Yes.
So these are things that we need to be able to say, own our story, say, this is where we are, but this is what's needed. Our pathway might not mimic a global north developed country who, by the way, has already gone through industrialization, used all its coal, and is now sitting on the other side where it has some of the money and the luxury to do some of the other things. It doesn't mean we're sort of, beholden to where we are now. There are massive opportunities in leapfrogging in the transition as well that we, I think, have the brain, the capacity, the ability to do, but are we doing that together? And that's where I think, again, it's a collective responsibility of sectors and industries to be clear about their challenges, clear about their opportunities, and then from that, also use that to inform how they report so that it is proportionality and all of that can actually be brought in.
Thank you. Karina, very quickly, from your perspective, do you think, just building on what Shamila is saying, do you think that the South African businesses can benefit by building out their non-financial sustainability reporting?
Absolutely. I think we've seen more than once and throughout the world that real value is created to stakeholders with proper reporting. But, linked to what has been said, it is absolutely our role as business leaders to look at what is material in our environment, and that we don't use it as a tick box approach just purely to meet certain standards, etc. So we need to apply our minds as to what is not just material in a country context, or industry context, but in our own organization, and only then can it really be meaningful to stakeholders and really add value to stakeholders.
Well, thank you very much. Net up tide. Brilliant. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did. Absolutely love the perspectives that you ladies bring to the table, and look forward to sharing, collaborating, building, enabling together on non-financial and sustainability reporting. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ladies. Thank you. And just remember to get your gift pack as you go down. So thank you very, very much to our panelists for a very informative session that will close us out for now, because we're going to take a lunch break. So lunch is going to be served. And then, of course, we'll continue these conversations when we return. And we're going to delve into an essential megatrend shaping our future, the business of biodiversity, regenerative land innovation. So that's what we will be sort of jumping into. Lunch is served on the rooftop. So when you get outside, everyone will direct you as to where to go to get your lunch. It's basically you've got to get into the lift and enter floor 6, and that's where you'll get to go to the rooftop and enjoy lunch over there. If I may ask you, please, everyone, to be back by 10 to 2 latest, so 13:50, and then we will resume once again. And speakers, for those of you that are up next as well, just make sure you get here a bit earlier than that time so that we can just brief you. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you. Enjoy lunch.